Hello and welcome to this session for the Global Walkability Correspondence Network, GWCN. This is a correspondence session in which we have a featured network member sharing about their own work and issues from their community and connecting with the network via Q&A. Today, I'm very happy to say we have Lorenzo Mele based in Toronto as the featured correspondent. Lorenzo Mele is the principal of Ativo Designs, a demand management and active design consulting practice that is committed to creatively reimagining and animating our environments to influence healthy and sustainable behaviors. He is a member of the board of directors for the Association of Commuter Transportation of Canada, ACT, and the Canadian Urban Transit Association, CUTA. He is also a member of the Ontario Traffic Council, Active Transportation Committee, and the Ontario Public Health Association, Built Environment Working Group. Very happy to be entering this session and to learn from Lorenzo's decades of experience. We were chatting before we started recording, observing advocacy and what works and what doesn't. The title of this session is Overcoming Roadblocks with Advocacy Campaigns. And without further ado, I turn it over to you, Lorenzo.
Great. Thank you, Annika. Much appreciated. And thank you as well for all the work you're doing with the network. I think it's really, really valuable, and it gives a lot of inspiration and support to people doing work around the world. So thank you again for your work. Annika and I have talked about advocacy a little bit over the last few months since I joined the network. And I recently came across an article that framed advocacy in a really what I thought was an interesting way, and capturing this notion of roadblocks. And so I'd like to share that with you this morning, as well as discuss some opportunities. But more importantly, I think I'm hopefully we'll be able to leave some time for a little bit of conversation with the people that are on the call. I just like to get a sense of how people are approaching advocacy in their own world. So an acknowledgement, the work on the roadblock notion of trying to overcome roadblocks with advocacy was prepared by Matthew Siegel, Director of Communications with Strategy Corp. That's a company that I'm working with right now on a parking management project. And the LinkedIn post is there, and have a look at the full article. But that's what sort of prompted me to share this with you. As an overview, the pandemic has created opportunities on many fronts. It's disruption, however you want to frame it. But I think from a standpoint of active and shared transportation, there are post-pandemic policy opportunities. I just want to go through those. So, overcoming these roadblocks, how do we, manufacture, create this political will? And there's some interesting insights on that, specifically around digital campaigns and so on. And so we'll take a little bit of a deep dive into that. And then a project that I've been working on for a number of years, the Walking Audit, as a way to make cities more walkable, but really as a foundation, as well as a catalyst for advocacy. The Walking Audit it may be a really useful tool for people to use. And then let's have some discussion with some time. So I always have to be reminded of this, but why walking? Why are we concentrating on this? In a Canadian context, this is the #1 physical activity. The policy alignment with encouraging active transportation, walking is I would say quite incredible. I've just listed a few of the types of plans that I deal with. The official plans, this is related to land development, climate change strategy, transportation plans, school travel plans, Vision Zero, healthy community, public health and economic development. Every single one of those plans somewhere, either as a key feature or a really important feature, has walking, active transportation. And then we don't have to get into the power or the prevention power, and we can see what the public health agencies have been stating for many years. And so, I mean, this becomes a really key sort of part of the message when we're thinking about advocacy is, you know, why are we promoting this? And there's a lot more to it, but I just thought I'd put up some of the health reasons. Let's think about these policy opportunities created by the pandemic. It's drastically changed daily mobility patterns. You know, globally, we know that there's some, you know, sort of resemblance of you know, change happening, you know, back to status quo, but I think the status quo is gone, so to speak. We did see that the use and acceptance of walking and cycling rose during the pandemic, and it continues to rise. And I would suggest that there's this rare sort of policy window shift favoring active transportation in front of us in many locations. And, you know, really it's time to ramp up these local advocacy efforts. So taking a closer look at this policy window shift, and I've just prepared this slide for illustration purposes, but if you could imagine a world where we, you know, initially began sort of designing roads exclusively for private automobiles. I mean, it didn't happen that way, but we, you know, think about the 1920s, 1930s, and sort of the advance of the automobiles, and we could see that roads were exclusively designed, beginning to be exclusively designed for private automobiles. Land uses, again, private automobiles. But this policy window is shifting, and it's shifting to the point where, you know, now land uses, access can be designed exclusively for all ages, all abilities, active and shared transportation. So they refer to this as the Overton window. Again, I've done this as for illustration only, but it just shows you how that window can move along that continuum of policy ideas, and it creates an acceptance. So there's a public acceptance today that there wasn't, you know, 15, 20 years ago. So I just think it's an important time for us to be thinking about advocacy in a sophisticated way. Okay, let's get into these roadblocks. The first one is always, you know, that makes a lot of sense, but do my constituents support it? So, you know, the local councillors, your elected officials may not necessarily be, you know, taking the pulse of the community on these issues. So it becomes, you know, an important sort of part around thinking about how do we get that political will to make the changes. There's not enough energy right now to generate this movement inside. So these are all these roadblocks that are put up. But grassroots advocacy, simple real world objectives can quickly elevate the issue. And if we think about current ways, or the current situation is causing hardship to constituents' lives. On transit, that's a really important one. We often think about the people using transit and how that's disrupting their lives if we take service away or adjust service or increase fares and so on. So thinking about how it's affecting people is key. And then finally, using some geographic targeting, the right messaging, enlisting residents, small businesses to try to sort of mount some support and direct it at your advocacy target, whoever it is that you're trying to influence with your campaigns. So roadblock one makes sense to me, but do my constituents support it? So some suggestions on how to get through that, I think, are what we're sharing here. Roadblock two, if this is so critical, why are you the only one I'm hearing about this from? I've heard this many times at conferences from elected officials at cycling conferences. Like, why should we care about cycling when 1 or 2% of the mode split is on cycling? And I think that you know, this is a key one because there's competing attention for the decision makers' time. We've got to, you know, think about other ways to make that advocacy sort of come at them in a way that moves them off their their path. So it tries to influence them. When a local resident association presents these concerns about traffic safety, for example, it may not move the needle. But as an example, using a compelling video, sharing on social media that may be, well done or provocative, and it actually gets people's attention, it starts to bring, as they say, new eyeballs and new awareness from within the halls of government. So, amplifying whatever the issue is and making sure that the decision makers understand that this is an important issue is key on this. Roadblock 3, there's 5 of these, so I'm just going to go through them. So I'm willing to move forward on this, but I don't think I can go it alone. We've heard this before as well. What they're saying is really they're asking for cover. There's a risk in whatever decision that you're trying to get them to make, whether it's budget expenditures on active transportation or whatever it might be. Contentious issues like taking away general purpose travel lanes for automobile and converting them into active transportation is probably, next to trying to have a sidewalk installed in communities, probably one of the most difficult things we do in traffic and transportation engineering. So the advocacy campaign can start to create, for lack of a better term, some cover, an op-ed in a targeted publication, a petition that supports the policy change. And so at some point, it puts the elected official into a position where they can answer that question of why she shared, why she advanced the issue. Well, I was compelled to do something after reading about it in the news and receiving a lengthy petition. So this is a really well orchestrated, nice way to get over that roadblock of, hey, I'm willing to move forward, but I don't think I can go it alone. I need to know where the support is. And that in a sense is our job to make sure that support becomes amplified and people are well aware that the support exists. Okay, roadblock 4. It's too partisan. This issue is too partisan. I don't think I can touch it. It's, in some cases, like I say, taking away a travel lane, a general purpose travel lane. It's like touching as they say, the third rail in politics, that highly electrified rail that, maybe might end your career. But advocacy campaigns are most successful when they're presented and serve a broad coalition. So the elected official needs to understand that this cuts across personas. It cuts across the citizenry. And so it needs to be appealing to individuals, organizations from all political perspectives who will grow the campaign's membership and counter the partisan critique. So you need that counter voice there, that supportive voice. And then when we're putting together these advocacy materials, think about the right message and positioning. So who are you trying to influence? How are you trying to influence them? And it becomes key in terms of the message and how you're going to position that message. And then, of course, a coalition of this type of advocacy can, as they say, pierce through the partisanship, starts to frame it around community versus individuals, just, it's a boutique idea and so on and so forth. No, this is something that touches the entire citizenry. The other point that I'll make on this is that I spent 5 years working in public health and as an advisor in chronic disease injury prevention. I straddled between the public health department and the transportation department as an advisor to both of those directors. And one of the observations that, is pretty straightforward when you're looking at this problem through a public health lens is that the only way you're going to be able to move the needle in terms of creating public health benefits at a population level is by getting, many percentages of people engaging in the behavior. And you can't just have, 1%, 2%, 3%. There's got to be, large numbers of the population that engage in the behavior. So the advocacy of this type that targets the partisanship issues is really vital. And then finally, roadblock 5. And this is, it's good to hear this. I'm with you. But this is a decision that needs to be made by civil servants, not politicians. All of a sudden, and elected officials are classic at this. They'll ride both sides of the fence. They'll lose all humility when it comes to certain issues, and they'll wade right into the technical matters. But on other issues that they think might be problematic, they'll defer to the bureaucracy. It's true that the bureaucracy can create obstacles as well, and they are real. The challenge that we have is that targeting bureaucrats directly with an advocacy action may not be appropriate. And, lobbying is something that goes on all the time. I didn't use the word lobbying. We're using the word advocacy, but the lobbying industry is, we don't have to get into that, but it's well developed. It's very strategic. It's stealth. It's, so we need to be thinking about how, organizations, private sector does, lobbying, and think about that as well in the context of the civil service. But a successful campaign that creates this multifaceted advocacy ecosystem, as they say, starts to work into that policy space. People start to become aware of the energy behind certain policy preferences. And then it gives the bureaucrat, along with the elected official, the comfort and the confidence to start moving in that direction and to support whatever advocacy around active transportation you've got going. In other words, if you target the right elected official with the right message, you'll hit the right civil servants too. And then finally, when combined with pressure applied on these key political decision makers, even this will start to move. So that kind of concludes this idea of the roadblocks, how to overcome them. This slide deck's available. The article's available too, if you want a little bit of further details on this. And then the key points really is that, generating energy from a broad coalition of grassroots supporters who can really, turn up that pressure is key. And it's got to be part of your toolbox. Advocacy campaigns, can generate that missing political will, and using meaningful evidence-based solution-oriented interactions with elected officials, top civil servants, starts to give them the comfort that this policy window actually is viable, and we can have some success with it. So the tools are new when we're thinking about, the digital world and different platforms that are available to us, but the mechanism's the same. It's just civics in action. It's our democratic system. It requires elected leaders to be accountable to their voters, but there is electoral risk for the advocacy target, and that can compel change one way or the other. So if they sense there's risk not supporting the campaign, there's risk there. So you need to set the right conditions for them. And then finally, taking time to do proper advocacy is always worth it, even if it means taking a slightly longer path from problem to solution. So some key points to take away on this. And I'll shift over to the walking audit, and then we'll pause and get into some conversation. Okay, so as a strategic way to start building an advocacy campaign, this is one of the tools that I'm aware of that we've used before, actually as bureaucrats. So in the public health department, we were advocating for change. We needed a tool to influence the engineering community and the planning community. And the tool that we had looked at a number of different tools, but this is the one that really sort of made sense to us, was the walking audit. And this picture here, I don't know if you noted, the gentleman in the yellow vest is gentleman by the name of Dan Burden. Dan is a walking advocate from the United States. We've had him come to conferences and work with communities in Calgary. For example, Calgary, Alberta, you worked with their team there on creating some walkable areas in a specific area of the downtown. Anyway, Dan's walked in over 2,000 communities. He's an incredible guy, but it does all start with getting out into the community and getting your feet on the ground. And then thinking about this audit, unbiased examination, evaluation of the walking environment. We're trying to identify concerns for pedestrians related to safety, access, comfort, convenience of that environment that we're getting people to spend time in. So that's what the audit is, and it's used in many different situations, of course. Why the audits? Well, we're informing planning and design. This is where we cottoned on to this in public health. So we were being asked to comment on environmental assessments, corridor studies, Vision Zero plans, and so on. And we needed an informed way to start talking about, the geometry of the roadway, the setbacks, the volume, and so on. And the walking audit, along with something called multimodal level of service analysis, starts to understand how that right-of-way is going to be used by those competing interests. But more importantly, the audit really starts to uncover those deficiencies. So it's an evaluation of this walking audit that's objective, structured, and evidence-based. Again, why? Public and stakeholder engagement. People can understand the roles. You build partnerships once you're actually out in the field doing this work. It's a coordinated municipal response. Doing it with the municipality can work well as a civil society sort of group. You're raising awareness around the issues, of course, the crash data, the conditions, and ultimately you're building support and you're advocating for this change. And you can showcase these successes. And there's other reasons why people do it as well. And one of those is that it starts to get into this idea of applying the principles of UX design to active transportation. And this is something that over the last few years, I've done a little bit of research in an Ontario context to understand how municipal engineering departments were using a walking audit, for example. And what I discovered is that they weren't using it. Hardly anyone was using it. But more importantly, what I understood was that they weren't really thinking about the users necessarily top of mind in their work. So when we think about these principles in UX design, in the digital world, we're thinking about who are we designing it for? What are their abilities, behaviors, needs, and goals? And finally, how do we bring joy and delight into their lives? And really, that's our goal when we're doing this work in a public realm through the right-of-way. We're not trying to make people's lives, less safe, dangerous, and difficult. We're trying to bring joy and delight into the lives. And I think that this work needs to be taken and explored. But I really think that the principles in UX design fit with what we're trying to accomplish in active transportation system design. A couple of final words on this. There's numerous audit tools. I've listed these here. There's probably more of them. When I worked in the public health department, we actually developed our own tool specifically for the local land use context that we were working in. But some of these other tools may be useful for you as well. And then finally, a bit of a shout out to Canada Walks. We're making Canada a great place to walk. The vision is a Canada where everyone can enjoyably, easily, and safely walk to school, work, play, shopping, and transit. And with that, I'll pause and we can get into some questions and discussion. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Lorenzo. So yes, now we'll go into Q&A. Lorenzo, I believe, is a skilled moderator, so I will allow him to moderate.
Sure. All right. I can't see the chat function here, but let me just.
Yes, please feel free to drop, if you're not able to talk, if you're in a setting where you can't talk or you don't want to talk, please feel free to drop your questions in chat as well. And you just use the hand raise function so we could see who has questions. There's Alan with a question.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. Thank you so much, Lorenzo. That was really interesting and really good to hear. Just thinking a bit about the advocacy, and then thinking about the issues that we all have everywhere at the moment with political polarization, and how we kind of have to fight against that quite a lot, and how sometimes it's kind of like fighting against a wall, because people who do consider themselves to be on the left will be in favor of these things, and people who consider them to be on the right sometimes will just be automatically against it, even though it's in their own benefit, it's good for their health and all these kind of issues. So maybe just to reflect a bit, and then also ask you about, so maybe personally, I've seen that many times the best tool is always to kind of get hyper local, talk to people, listen to people, and try and do that bit of explaining and teaching and learning together about what can be better for our areas, how to go about those pedestrian spaces. But which other ways do you think can help us get past that kind of polarization?
Well, thanks, Alan. Thanks for the question. And you're right. The world is polarized. I don't know if it's always been that way, but maybe it has been, and we're just sort of more, acutely aware of that polarization. The key on this is to find a vehicle, find a message that's going to cut across the partisanship. There was one of the roadblocks is that it's partisan. Where's that sort of overwhelming kind of support? And so by bringing together diverse actors in the community, I'll share a story. When I first started work in transportation demand management over 20 years ago here in the Toronto area, one of the very first organizations I reached out to was the Canadian Automobile Association. And my colleagues thought, I'd lost my mind. Here we are trying to promote transit and walking and cycling and so on and so forth, developing these plans at a municipal level. And here I am trying to have breakfast with their director of communications for Canadian Automobile Association. And what we understood at the time that the CAA was actually against, this is over 20 years ago, mind you, they were actually against some of the transit plans that were beginning to emerge because the general purpose lanes were going to be eliminated. Anyway, the point of me sharing that story with you is that by building that relationship, by taking probably 2 to 3 years to nurture that relationship, eventually, our phone rang, and it was the Canadian Automobile Association head office saying that they wanted to participate in our, smart commuter scheme. So, sometimes finding the people that are most against your proposal or your idea, they become the most vital to listen to engage respectfully and with purpose, and to really understand what these personas are thinking about. So if we think about, segmenting, all of these constituents, that's one way to bring some clarity into, what the message might be as we understand who all these people are. So that becomes key as well. And then finally, the opportunities like the walking audit in a safe environment, a non-threatening environment, becomes a nice tool to use. And and you get people to, you know, participate in that walking audit that may be against your proposal. So not an easy thing to do, Alan, but certainly doable. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lorenzo.
Mario had his hand up, and then on to, so maybe Mario and then Jeremiah's question.
Okay, Mario.
Yes. Hi, Lorenzo. Thank you very much. It's one of my struggles in life is to find out the breach on the rock where the light comes can go in. So, and I will just make an underlying about your roadblock 4, and then I will have a question for you. And the underline about the coalitions is always something that I always say is about cyclists and walkers. First thing is stop the fight. I always say it's not walkers or cyclists that control the road, so let's not fight for the breadcrumbs. And that's a very important message. And from my experience, walking, the walkers, they don't have a political identity. They don't even identify themselves as walkers. And cyclists are very enthusiastic and very, they're very powerful lobby tools. So we should use those two characteristics, because if cyclists start putting pedestrians first in their demands, they will have 100% of voters on their side, and first, and that's something that they will should start learning how to do, is to fight for pedestrians, to have this coalition, political coalition that is invisible but is very much there. So fighting for children, elderly, and all that, it's very, very important, because otherwise, if you just fight for cyclists, you have the bike lash that everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is, in terms of pedestrians, I also use very much the enthusiasm of cyclists. So instead of, for example, in social media, when I post something pro-pedestrian, I have like a few likes. But if I say pedestrians and cycling, I have a lot of likes, because cyclists spend a lot of time on social media and they are very enthusiastic. So I think that's something that we can really make a very good coalition. And I really advise to not fight each other. My question for you is always a dilemma, is if we know from experience, professional experience, we know that change comes from a very ugly expression that I don't like, but it's carrots and sticks. So we cannot do only pro-cycling or walking policies. We need also to restrict car use, at least in the city center, where you really have an alternative. A lot of advocacy people say, let's not use any kind of negative language. Let's only use positive language. So pro-walking, pro-cycling. But indeed, is not really enough. We really need to fight car use, especially when it's very short distance, for example. So what's your view on that? Oh, yes, and just saying that audits is wonderful. I've been doing them. It's like a conversation starter, and I think they are really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Appreciate that. On your first point, I agree with you wholeheartedly that if the cycling coalitions were to broaden their scope, their mandate to, think about it as active transportation, and they're, bringing in the pedestrian discussion into their work, I think that would be very important. The other organization that I forgot to mention, and I talk about it as an organization, but communities in our part of the world will have what they call either an active transportation citizen advisory committee, or a cycling pedestrian citizen advisory committee. And these types of committees that are made up of residents become key to that idea of bridging the gap between, not the gap, but bringing together cycling and pedestrian issues. And so to your second point, Mario, around dealing with the automobile, I think what we're seeing is, at least in our part of the world, in our city, we're seeing, a struggle between, a lack of resources to expand, not only a lack of resources, but a lack of land to expand highways and roadways. Just can't be done in a lot of parts of our city. And so there is that tension there. And the idea that you're going to begin to have a level playing field, between automobile users and people using other mobility, I think is a place where we can start to have that conversation. The idea of user pay is something that, if we could start to bring that kind of language into the discussion, I think it becomes important on transportation. Parking management becomes a key consideration to thinking about, how people are using the transportation system. And so some of the work that we're doing around parking management and monetizing the municipal assets to actually move from free of charge parking to paid parking starts to give people sort of pause and thinking about, automobile ownership issues and so on. So it's not a clear answer for you, Mario, but I think that I do like keeping the message positive. I do like framing things in user pay and making people understand what the true value is of owning and operating an automobile, but more importantly, what the cost is to these municipal governments, to maintaining the roadways and so on. So again, some facts, presenting them to the right people in the right way, hopefully start to get to some answers on this. And then the final word really is that there's this idea that, people that are shopping always arrive in automobiles. This is in our part of the world. And so, shop owners that have as customers people that are pedestrians that arrive on foot or by transit or by bicycle, they become key allies in this conversation as well, when you're starting to think about, automobile access versus active transportation and so on. So hopefully that helps. But I do appreciate the comment on combining cycling and pedestrian advocacy.
Lorenzo, you have a question
All right.
in the chat.
Okay.
Do you see it from Jeremiah?
Jeremiah, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah.
Sure. One of the slides you had, and I may have been reading it wrong, but it kind of hinted at this notion of evidence-based and solution-oriented interactions with elected officials. And I wonder what research or what it is that you have that's evidence-based, quote unquote, and solution-oriented interactions with elected officials. What are those things, and what data do you have to kind of show that these are some ways that are more effective to interact and what have you?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremiah, for that question. So the walking audit, for example, is a tool that, when used at a point in time where there's decisions to be made on a specific corridor, for example, the civil servants will present the case for, why changes to be need to be made to the corridor, and they're using transportation modeling. They might be using different corridor analysis that they've carried out and so on. So that's evidence that they're using to justify, whatever project that it is that they're working on. From a civil society advocacy perspective, what can we do to equip ourselves with the same kind of, not same kind of evidence, but a similar type of approach? And the walking audit does play into that. The other benefit that we've seen is by enlisting medical health officials into the conversation, so they become the spokespersons for the project that you're trying to undertake. So it's trying to find that credible spokesperson, that credible voice, but more importantly, it's understanding who you're targeting and where's the, to Mario's term, where's that rock under the bridge? I think that's what you were talking about. Like where's that chink in the armor to get through? So it's not an easy thing to do. It's just not, Twitter campaign and off. It needs to be well thought out, strategic, targeted, and it starts with who are you trying to influence? Why are you trying to influence them? And then, thinking about those roadblocks that we just went through, and there's some interesting little nuggets on there and how to get through them. So again, traffic safety data that's available, it typically doesn't, lie. I mean, it's the data. It's just the way it's presented, who it's presented to. The outcomes of the walking audit, again, as I said, become really vital in terms of understanding the deficiencies, but more importantly, the desires of the people that live in the area on what they want to see, not some, planning and engineering team from the local government. And I've seen this time and time again as a staff person. We'll put product out on the road and then realize that we haven't respected the desire lines. We haven't respected the setbacks to create a safe, comfortable walking environment. And then we step back and we go, why do we have to have school buses take the kids to school because this intersection's deemed unsafe? I mean, we've seen that many times too. So instead of improving the intersection, they'll just put a school bus to get the kids through the intersection. Which, I mean, I think is just where that's failure, when we start doing that kind of thing. But that's the response. I mean, that's a legitimate response. Anyway, Jeremiah, hopefully I didn't go off track there, but health evidence is important. We want people to be healthy. We want them to be safe. How are we going to get them there? I just want to share this with you. I'm still in touch with the Canadian Automobile Association. Actually did a project for them recently. And they shared with me that they were doing some public engagement with their membership, and they were asking questions around road safety. Vision Zero is a hot topic here in our part of the world. Of course, like everything, we bastardize it. We turn it into a numbers game and so on. We don't capture the true spirit of Vision Zero, but we're getting there. Anyway, what the CAA shared with me was that they were doing this public opinion survey, and one of the questions was, what would it take to get you to stop engaging in distracted driving using your handheld device in your automobile? And they gave them a list of potential responses. And the number one answer, 75% of the respondents said that once I get into a motor vehicle collision, then I will stop using my phone. So I have to get into a crash first, put at peril, my life, the life of others, and then I'm going to make a change. So some of these behaviors are sticky. Transportation behavior is one of the stickiest, I would suggest, trying to untangle that. But the key, and I think Mario talked about it as well as was Alan, it's the idea that if you have an automobile in your driveway out front of your home or whatever it is, the likelihood of you using it goes way up. So really, I've always maintained, at least for the last few years, that what we should be targeting is a strategic, deliberate effort to actually unshackle people from automobile ownership. And as we do that, guess what? We're going to see rates of transit increase, bicycle use increase, and so on and so forth. So in a sense, what we're trying to do is make automobile ownership more difficult. But guess what? Motorists make it more difficult for themselves anyway. So in a way, we've got all their help, creating, traffic congestion, collisions on the road, and so on and so forth. And having a targeted campaign, strategic, that is, running in the background, so that when people are prepared to make a change in their mobility, the lease is expired on the vehicle, the transmission just went. Now's the time to start thinking about, what are my options? Maybe I need to trade my second car in for an electric bike, and so on and so on. So those decisions are being made every day, right? As we speak, people are making those decisions, and having a well organized strategic advocacy campaign that supports people as they make that transition, that's another consideration as well. So you're being purposeful and deliberate about supporting people as they divorce themselves from automobile ownership. And then everything just falls into place, because we've seen in some cases in the US, for example, there was a study, I don't have my fingers on it, but we can find it. There was a study done in Los Angeles where they were, observing transit use, going way up through the early 2000s into the mid 2000s, 2009, 2010. It went up. There was an economic disruption in those days, 2008, 2009. And then as things started to, improve on an economic front in the US, one of the things that they observed in the Los Angeles area was a reduction in transit use. So a team at UCLA tried to discover, okay, what's causing this? And after, an analysis of various data, one of the things that they discovered was that automobile ownership rates were also increasing at the same time transit use was decreasing. So they were trying to pinpoint what the factor was. And, ultimately their conclusion was that, people are just able to afford an automobile. They're buying them, they're using them, they're not using transit. See if there's another question on here. If not, we can important senior data fuser to crack and everything. Yeah, right. That's Gordon Lightfoot. Whoever put that.
No, it's actually Leonard Cohen.
Oh, it's Cohen. Okay.
I had a question, and actually part of it is in response to Jeremiah's question. Is it okay if I go ahead?
Yeah, go for it.
So first of all, thank you very, very much. This is, even though I missed the beginning, this has been really great, this conversation. And I really like the points you're bringing. One of the things I discovered very quickly when I began my career as a transportation planner / modeler is we plan for what we measure. And there are some things that are easier to measure than others. And one of the things which we do not measure very often is pedestrians, actually. So, but we measure vehicles, how many cars there are, how many people are in buses, bus frequency and things like that. But we have very, very limited pedestrian data. So this is one of the things that makes it challenging to make these sort of data-based cases. And in terms of demand modeling as well, like pedestrian trips are not at all in the model. So they don't even get reflected in any way at all when you make an improvement to the pedestrian environment. The only improvement they could be is fewer people using cars. So you have an indirect sort of impact on congestion levels. So anyway, that's something I discovered. And I think, so this is, I think it's really, I don't know what you're doing in the Toronto agents area in terms of measuring pedestrian volumes, but I think this is a crucial element. There are companies that have tools now to help with this kind of analysis. I think particularly at a corridor level, it would be really interesting to start trying to get that data. Like I'm happy to see your walk audits. You mentioned that this is done at a corridor level. I think this is really important, not just doing individual intersections, but really looking at this sort of entire corridor and understanding filtered permeability as well, like how we can give pedestrians shortcuts and make it easier for them. One of the reasons why people are abandoning public transportation is also because the bus is stuck in traffic. It's not responding well to their needs. So it's not only a question of money, but it's how we allocate space, I think. And this is the hard part, is really shifting space to give more space to pedestrians and also to public transportation. So the bus will actually be faster than cars. In North America, that's very, very hard to do. And one of the things we're noticing in Montreal is we can convert a two-way street into one-way and like put bike paths on each side, but removing the parking is almost impossible. Like it's really, really hard to remove the parking. And so this actually, we can talk on another occasion, my idea of community parking sort of is a way to address this sort of concept of structuring the parking differently. And actually parking lots at malls, we need to consider the pedestrian issues within those spaces. There's actually a huge number of collisions that occur in parking lots. And this is like there's no space for pedestrians usually in those spaces at all. We subsidize the amount of parking spaces that are like the owners of those spaces don't really pay the value of them. So also coming back to how we position this, like I think economics, like I'm sure, I don't know if you mentioned strong towns or not, but like the economic aspects of this is, there's not right or left. Like it is a good, for municipalities that don't have money, it actually costs, it's much more cost effective to make it easier for people to walk and ride bikes, because expanding a road is incredibly expensive. Maintaining roads is incredibly expensive. So I think that's a sort of conversation that transcends politics when we bring it back to economics. And I guess the overarching theme, instead of framing this as Mario suggested as, against cars, I like to position it as a quality of life thing, like quality of life for everyone, like including drivers. Like, I wouldn't say we're making it better for driving, but fewer people driving actually does improve everyone's lives, whether you're in a car or not. So like, and the mayor of Montreal, the current mayor, like we had a political party that tried to win focusing on transportation issues, and they never succeeded until the woman who now is the head of the party, like she started positioning this as a quality of life issue. And that applies in the suburbs as well as in central city areas. And this is a lot of regions. This is a big challenge. Like suburban people vote one way, central cities people vote another way. And this is where you're getting this like very big conflicts. So framing it as a quality of life, I think, is useful. Anyway, thank you.
I appreciate that. The question of the numbers, numbers of pedestrians. What I've relied on in the past are some proxy numbers. I showcased one of them right at the beginning, which was, the majority of Canadians, that's how they get their daily physical activity is through walking. Any recreation master plan that's been done by a local government, where they go out and ask people, how are they getting recreation? Well, they're not, necessarily playing badminton, tennis, and hockey. They're going out for a walk. Like so there's a lot of common ground there. But I agree with you that if we could start to capture, the numbers, but is there a way to use a proxy for those, for that versus, trying to actually set up, surveillance through corridors and counts and so on. The transit use number, of course, is important because, every transit trip typically begins with a walking trip. So some of those proxy numbers are key. The number that is not published locally is the automobile ownership rate per thousand. And that's a number to keep your eye on. And in Ontario, guess what? That number's going up. Like that number's not going down. And even adjusted for population, at least the way I read the last stat, was that there's a net increase in automobile ownership. So that number per thousand is probably, approaching 700. Whereas in places in South America, it might be down to 180 vehicles per 1,000 people. So that number is a real indicator of mobility behavior in any given jurisdiction. It's not the only indicator, but it's a pretty good indicator. And then, of course, this idea that, 95% of the times the automobiles are sitting idle. I think the economic pressures that people are feeling at a household level will start to take care of, that second or third automobile. They'll start to question it. The pandemic did that. 40% of the population that actually has the ability to remote work, some of them stopped their commute guess what? They sold their car. They didn't need it anymore. So, that movement is afoot. And that's why I suggest that there's this policy window that's, I don't know if it's wide open. It might be a crack, just like Leonard Cohen said, but it's definitely open. There's light coming through there. 15-minute city discussions are going on, but no one wants to have the hardest conversation, which is the automobile and how do we get it to pay its full cost, because people believe they're already paying a lot. The numbers sort of bear that out, but how do they pay even more? And that, that's not an easy one. But we've done it with other things. Like, for example, for a number of years, I worked with a water utility, and I know we're over time here, but I just want to share this one last story. And for years, water in British Columbia was not metered. There were no water meters. And, even though they get a lot of rain, they rely on a storage system, store the winter water, drain it down in the summer, and so on. Anyway, no water meters. People use water recklessly, foolishly, wasted it. So on the day that you put the meters in communities, the consumption drops 20-25%. I mean, there's many studies that have been done on demand side management on water. So what I'm suggesting is that, unbundle the road network from this, property tax base, allow it to function as a true utility, capture the value of the land that is in the public right ownership, the commons, parking, the right of way. And, then we start seeing some leveling of that playing field. But I think we're still a long ways off. Parking is one of the ones that has the most appetite to start putting a charge on. But I agree with you. We're gonna need to tackle the automobile issue as well. I know we're out of time. Annika, I just want to thank you again.
No. Gil has a question. Gil, I would like to.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Jill here. I've got so many questions, but I guess the key one for me, because I've been wanting to start doing some videoing, photographing, data collecting, workshops, so walking audits. Given that there are so many different sorts of tools, do you find it best to go for like simple tools that only have a few measurements, or is it better to do like a more comprehensive one that's in a spreadsheet? Or, what's been your experience? And particularly working with people who are very unfamiliar with this sort of thing and might be disabled as well.
Yeah. I'm happy to share the tool that we developed in Peel region. I would say it's a relatively simple tool. It was based on some existing tools. As long as the audit tool captures, the various sort of parameters within the corridor that are going to, for example, drive the trip making, like, are there destinations within the corridor? The conditions of the corridor in terms of the actual surface conditions, the proximity to the roadway. There's a couple of interesting papers that have been done looking at an index, a walkability index. And so what features within the built environment really influence walking. And a team that I worked with in Peel region actually published a nice paper on that very topic. They developed the index. I think they had about 31 different parameters that they began with. They whittled that down to 7 or 8, I believe. But the most influential one around walking is just the destination. Is there a legitimate, destination to get to? So Jill, I suggest, definitely keeping it simple. That list that I prepared, there's all kinds of tools as part of that. People like having a score at the end of the exercise, so once you do your debrief, everybody inputs their values, you come up with a score. I think that that's useful because then it becomes, something you can compare it to for example, walk score. But if you look at walk score, at least the way I've understood it, it's mostly powered up by the destinations. So it's kind of agnostic to the walking conditions. As long as there's a destination that's within, sort of walking distance, whatever that is, then they're going to give it a high score. The walking environment could be atrocious. So anyway, hopefully that helps.
That destination thing is pretty irrelevant in places where it's mainly suburbia, car oriented, car geared.
Yeah, so you walk.
Where there may not be any destinations because it's
that's right.
It's what are those dormitory suburbs?
Yeah,
basically
obesogenic environments.
Yeah, we decided here in Australia. We decided to follow that North American leadership.
Yeah,
and Canberra designed. I'm in the capital of Canberra, designed from the beginning around cars.
Yeah, no, I mean we're all faced with it. I mean some of the plans I've seen where there's ideas around strategic land purchases, to create some porosity into neighborhoods. I know there's been a conversation happening in the last few days around heat and pedestrians. So for example, one of the indicators that they had looked at was tree cover through the corridor. So, is the tree cover increasing? Is it decreasing? So, yeah, I'll share that paper with the group through the network because it has, though, as I said, it started off with 31 different criteria. They whittled it down to 7 or 8. So if the tool that you're using addresses those criteria, to a certain extent, that would be useful as well. And it does need to be calibrated to a certain extent for the local context. So the tool might have questions on limited access highways, for example, crossing limited access highway ramp structures and so on, but those might not exist in your community. So, remove those questions from the tool when you're doing it, that kind of thing.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, and Zv's put up another example. I look at this from the standpoint of, what tools do I have to influence change? I can't change anyone's behavior. I'm the only one that can change my own behavior, but I can influence people. And that's kind of where the digital world is gone now too. It's moved out of, trying to get eyeballs and attention to how do we have some meaningful influence on these people? And I think that's a key message in our advocacy work as well. So whatever message you're putting out there, who's the target? Is it going to move the needle? Is it confusing our story? Is it adding to our story? Is it a credible messenger? And are we cutting across these partisan lines as we've been discussing? Because I agree with you, something as fundamental as walking, it's not a right or a left, issue. I mean, yeah, you need to use your right and left feet to get going, but, it's not a right or left issue at all. And I think people understand that, when you start putting, the Parks and Recreation Department just did a study, 55% of our residents get their main form of exercise through walking. Should we make the walking environment better for them? Well, it starts to fit, I think, when you have that conversation. Okay. Are there any other questions? I don't think so. Zvi, thank you for that local logic, indicate. There's lots of research that's been done on this. My thing is always, where are the best parts of this research? How do I harness it for the work that we're trying to do? So, for example, last story, this parking strategy that we're working on for a local government here, in the suburbs. And, as I'm preparing the advocacy sort of remarks for this morning and thinking about this for many years, I realized, well, who are the advocates for paid parking? No one. No one's an advocate for paid parking. Everyone hates paid parking. But in reality, it's the city themselves that are the advocates. So what I'm suggesting to them through our work is that be deliberate about it. Stand right up and say, we're the advocates for this, and this is why we're advocating for it. City building, mobility management, all those other good things. The revenue part, temper that. That's the icing on the cake, even though there's, tens of millions of dollars to be made every year. And that starts to level the playing field. Taking money out of the pockets of the motorists for using a service like parking, and then reinvesting that money in, for example, a bike share scheme. I mean, that's a nice sort of linkage. And you might get some traction with that approach. All right. Okay, thanks everyone and Zvi, thanks for your comments. Really appreciate them. Hopefully we'll meet someday in Montreal. Are you coming to Toronto for the bike share summit?
When is that?
It's in September. There's it's an international gathering happening in Toronto on bike share.
We shall see.
Or maybe it's North American. It might be North American bike share.
It's probably North America. I sent you a message via LinkedIn. So check your LinkedIn messages.
Yeah, I will. Okay.
Lorenzo, really briefly, I just want to say thank you. And I am so excited by what you said about finding the people who are most against what you're doing. And that can become one of the most vital and constructive partnerships later. I think it's a really good challenge. It's a really good advocacy challenge. And it's exciting because it is so challenging, I think, too. But when it's so meaningful when that turn happens, right?
It's the tension. Like where there's tension, there's potential for change.
Yeah, exactly.
So avoiding the tension, there's no point.
No.
Like, and it has to be done, purposefully, respectfully, with humility, all of those things.
Yeah.
I mean, and I say that in earnest. I don't just use those terms lightly, because they'll see right through it. Anyone sees right through it. So it needs to be from a position of understanding of their problem as well, not just dismissing whatever is come up. So
many of us in the network do know. I mean, we're passionate advocates, but we know car dependence. We either are car dependent, or like myself, we grew up car dependent. It's not foreign to me. And I will quote you probably when I post this. I loved what you said about being purposeful and deliberate in supporting people as they divorce, I believe, auto ownership. I really like that. That was really great. So I say, let's start a campaign together.
Well, there's a nice book that was written by Katie Alvord, Divorce Your Automobile. So this idea of, and she framed it as a relationship, and it's brilliant. It's a really cute book. Katie Alvord, divorce your car. And it's actually really terrific because it's a love affair. It takes $10 billion a year for the automobile industry to influence you to have that love affair with the automobile, right? That's the kind of money they spend on marketing and advertising. It's incredible. So that's the kind of force that you're up against that's making driving, appealing, sexy, whatever, powerful, all of these things. But, I think you need to be aware of it, but I think you need to be strategic too, in terms of getting through that noise that they make.
Right.
And happy to share this again and keeping, love to hear what other people are doing on advocacy, interesting campaigns start to finish, and see if some case studies on this might be useful as well, Annika, to share.
Yeah, and if you're willing to host it again, because our network is 200 plus people, to capture other people, or even mixing I could see you leading some sort of activity, some sort of brainstorming where we take a break and put up ideas for campaigns. But I'm happy to help schedule that. So let's talk about that more.
I'd like to do that on the advocacy front
yeah.
specifically. Yeah, because there's
Okay.
great research, great tools, great information. How do we
Right.
package this up, move the needle? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll look forward to part 2 later this summer. Okay.
Okay.
I'll help schedule it. Thank you.
Right on. Bye, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.
Thank
Cheers.
you.